Welcome to yet another exciting video, in this case episode 1 of my Star Trek, the original series, episode breakdown video series. In this video I'll be looking at season 1, episodes 1 to 6 of Star Trek, the original series or generation, to identify historical references which can be used to determine the original history of the Star Trek universe. The episode order I am using is the production order. In order to understand the development of the history or vision, we need to study the episodes in the order they were written. While I'm uncertain of the exact writing order, the production order is about as close as I can confirm. The episode order information as broadcast is also included. Special thanks to the transcripts which can be found on the Chakotay site. When Gene Roddenberry created Star Trek back in 1966, he had a vision which remained basically consistent. When The Next Generation was released in 1987, Gene's vision had changed and the past needed to change in order to be consistent with the new vision. This video series will look at the original vision of Star Trek, starting with the earliest source material. Any historical facts from later sources which contradict the earlier references will be assumed to be an error. Minor changes in nomenclature can be excused. The Cage is the first pilot episode. It was the first episode produced but never broadcast. A survey ship, the SS Columbia, was exploring this region of space 18 years ago, which happens to be the region the Enterprise was in at this moment, or during the episode. The best guess is this episode occurred in 2254, so the SS Columbia was lost in 2236 in the Talos star group. I'm uncertain where the references come from, but her designation was NC 5940-1. The image in the left is a guess of what the SS Columbia looked like. The Talos group, which I assume to be the Talos star group, is a solar system, is shown here. The screen shows the classifications of planets, with Class M having an oxygen atmosphere. Additional data about the Class M planet is provided by the geologist. The location of the Talos group is a long way from Earth, but is unlikely that it's on the other side of the galaxy, as stated by Pike. The Vega colony is mentioned in this episode, which is the destination of the Enterprise. The Vega colony must be an advanced colony in order to provide medical assistance. The Vega colony must have sufficient facilities in order to provide crew replacements. It is obviously a colony of the Earth or Terrans. Rigel 7 was the last planet visited by the Enterprise. This was a planet which was generally unknown. The other key point is that it's not called a colony, thus it's not or unlikely to be a colony or even part of the Federation. It's most certainly an alien planet. Warp drive existed in this episode, but the terminology was unusual. The speed was described as time warp factor 7 rather than warp factor 7. It was also implied that hyperspace was entered when this occurred. In the episode, we are introduced to an alien race, the Talosians. The Talosians communicate telepathically. The Talosians had a war thousands of centuries ago and live underground, where they developed their mental powers. I'm assuming that the war occurred possibly 198,000 BC, perhaps. Regulus is a planet which Pike was considering setting up a business on. Regulus is probably not a colony, but may have been an Earth colony which was no longer classed as a colony, or is an alien inhabited planet. The latter is unlikely, as living on a non-human planet may not be viable. Imagine a human setting up a hot dog stand on Vulcan. Orion colony is another colony. Orion colony has green slave women who like to be taken advantage of. The colony is likely human, but there must be another race on the planet, or the green-skinned women were brought to Orion, possibly for commercial reasons. Basically, Orion slave traders. If this is part of the Federation, there's some moral stretching occurring here. While there is no mention of the Federation, Starfleet or photon torpedoes, we can exist or assume they exist. While deflector shields are not mentioned, a meteorite beam is, which could be the same thing. The Enterprise is part of the United Spaceship Fleet. Earth has a number of colonies, Vega and Orion. In addition, Pike can set up a business on Regulus, which is most likely a human planet which no longer has the status of a colony. Independent planet, basically. In the episode, we discover Earth was sending out survey ships a significant distance from Earth. Why no ship went out looking for the SS Columbia when it was lost is not explained, but distance could have been a reason. As the Enterprise can reach warp factor 7, it's assumed 18 years prior the speeds were a lot less. One guess of how far the Enterprise is from the closest Earth base is 6 weeks at warp 7. If the speeds were 10 times less, it would take 60 weeks or more than a year to reach it. The closest base would have been much further all those years ago, so it would have taken possibly years to send a ship to rescue the SS Columbia. However, the main reason no rescue mission was sent was the Columbia must have lost FTL communication capability, thus could not inform anyone it was in trouble or even where it was. There are 2 alien planets identified, Talos and Rigel 7. One interesting point is the Enterprise travels 18 light years at warp factor 7 to reach Talos. The actual time spent is not mentioned, but it may have been significant. Using a total wild guess, assuming each season represents 1 year of the 5-year mission, then each episode represents about 2 weeks of time. It's possible the distance was covered in 2 weeks, which gives the Enterprise the ability to travel 450 times the speed of light at warp factor 7. The time spent travelling could have been much greater, which is why the decision to head that way was made only after the second message. But even if it was 4 weeks, that still represents an impressive speed. Where No Man Has Gone Before is the 3rd episode of the first season. It was the 2nd episode produced. Its stardate is 1312.4 and its original air date was the 22nd of September 1966. While at no time does this episode mention Vulcan, we know Spock is not human because he lacks emotion. Spock claims one of his ancestors married a human female. The SS Valiant was an early impulse-drive starship which explored the edge of the galaxy and was caught in a magnetic storm and encountered a strange barrier, after which it was destroyed. The estimate is the Valiant was destroyed in 2061, 2063, or most likely in 2065. This episode is assumed to have occurred in 2264. We know the SS Valiant used impulse drive, but this must have been a type of impulse drive which allowed for faster-than-light travel. The SS Valiant may have looked like the ship in the left of the screen. This episode mentions another Earth colony, in this case the Aldebaran colony. Dr. Denier may have been born, studied, or just met the Enterprise at the colony, so we are uncertain how developed it was. The bottom right is a guess of what Aldebaran 3 looked like, which came from the internet. This may have been the Aldebaran colony mentioned in this episode. The SS Valiant was flung out of the galaxy and on the way back encountered a barrier which damaged the ship, killing some crew members and gave one crew member superhuman powers. There is some type of a galactic barrier, obviously. Assuming the Enterprise impulse drive was sublight, then there must have been an Earth base reasonably close. This means there is an Earth base close to the galactic barrier. The speed warp could have achieved is unknown, but if 1 day is equal to 1 year, then we must be dealing with 365 times the speed of light for warp drive. This could have been greater or less, but does align with our other reference so far. This episode mentions another planet, this time Deneb 4. This is probably not a colony, although the women of the planet seem compatible with Earth men. In the hyper-sex world of Star Trek, where different species can mate with each other, this may not have meant much, but could indicate this was a human planet which was no longer a colony. The episode mentions another planet, in this case a Delta Vega. This planet is uninhabited, but is a galactic mining station. We assume it's an Earth automated mining post. The episode mentions yet another planet, this time Demoris. As the inhabitants threw darts at Kirk, it is assumed that this is not an Earth planet and that this occurred during an exploration. In the episode we see the birth date of James R. Kirk, which is 012771. The current stardate is 1313.7, which may be wrong as the episode starts at stardate 1312.4. Later, James's middle name changes to a T. I should note in the original series the date looked like 1818.7 rather than 1313.7. An enhanced and tampered version is shown on the bottom left. The estimate is James T. Kirk is born in 2228. In the episode, there is no mention of the Federation, Starfleets, or photon torpedoes, but we can assume they exist. We are first introduced to the phaser rifle in this episode. Earth has a colony, Aldebaran. In addition, Kirk can have an encounter with an attractive female of Deneb 4, which may imply it's an Earth planet, but not a colony. It could also be alien, where the aliens are similar to humans. Finally, we have a mining station on Delta Vega, which is most certainly an Earth mining station. In this episode, we also discover Earth was sending out survey ships a significant distance from Earth. The SS Valiant, using impulse power, broke through the galactic barrier, after which it was destroyed, most likely in 2065, which was before the introduction of the warp drive. We need to understand this carefully. When Zefram Cochrane invented warp drive around 2061 or 2063, Earth was sending impulse-driven spaceships to the galactic edge. This could be as close as 200 light-years away, but it represents a massive effort and implies Earth was a powerful space-faring civilization at this time. This means the First Contact movie, released in 1996, is clearly wrong. I would have to assume it returned to a period after one of the global conflicts well before 2063 and had nothing to do with Zefram Cochrane, the warp drive and the first Vulcan contact. The movie would still work, and we can avoid rewriting Star Trek history if we assume this. There is one other alien planet identified, Demoris. There is a comment where impulse drive took years to cover the distance warp could cover in days. The ratio works reasonably well with other references, especially episode 14. Earth is roughly in the centre of the galactic plane, which means it could be between 400 and 500 light-years away from the galactic edge. The SS Valiant would need to travel at least 400 light-years, which means it must have FTL drive. I would suggest much slower than warp, which most likely is 400 times the speed of light, but if it was 20 times the speed of light, it could reach the galactic edge in 20 years. This supports the close proximity to an Earth base theory, but we need to ask ourselves why the barrier was not discovered earlier. It's possible this is how it played out, as why bother to travel to a region with no stars, but does seem a bit odd. As a matter of interest, the North Galactic Barrier is the closest, so I would have to assume it was travelling a galactic north. Note, the Earth crossed the galactic plane in 2012, moving north. This is reality. The galactic plane is about 1,000 light-years thick on average, so by 2065 the North Galactic Barrier was less than 500 years or light-years distance, and probably more than 400 light-years distance. The Corbomite Maneuver is the 10th episode of Season 1. It was the third episode produced. Its stardate is 1512.2 and its original air date was the 10th of November 1966. The Enterprise is using warp speed, that is, it's actually described as the term warp speed. The episode shows or indicates the speed of warp 3, but Kirk occasionally lapses into using the term warp factor in the episode. The Enterprise can use impulse to move, with the term used impulse power 2. This term is significant because Kirk uses the term impulse power to describe an impulse speed. There are a few episodes where the term impulse power is used with no clarifications on what this means, such as in episode 14, The Balance of Terror. Ship phases are used in this episode, with Kirk using the term main phases and phaser banks. While at no time does this episode mention Vulcan, Spock claims Baylock was like his father and his mother was a very fortunate Earth woman. While we knew Spock had an ancestor marry an Earth woman, we discovered that ancestor was his father. This episode mentions the First Federation and the flagship Fesarius with its commander Baylock. The First Federation is not a human federation. This shows a much later map of the First Federation. No First Federation planet name was ever mentioned in the episode, so this is pure speculation. In this episode, hand phaser is mentioned for the first time. In this case, Yeoman Rand uses a hand phaser to warm up some coffee. We do not actually see the phaser in this episode. In this episode, we learn Spock's mother was an Earth woman. Prior to this, we only knew Spock had Earth blood from an ancestor. The Enterprise is using ship-based phasers, warp, impulse and deflectors. Warp factor up to 3 are used and impulse power 2 is also used as a term. The use of impulse power 2 is significant as this means when impulse power is stated, it means the speed under impulse drive and not some type of power source. This confirms that some type of impulse drives can provide faster than light speeds, or at least strongly implies this. The Romulans used this type of drive, and the early Earth ships, starships, before warp was invented, also did. Drilling to a bit more detail, we learn that there is more than one phaser bank, and each of them have separate crews, while some of these could be considered as main phases. This implies there are other phases elsewhere on the ship, either weaker or perhaps pointing to the rear. The hand phaser is now introduced. While we had a phaser rifle in the past, this is the first hand phaser used in an episode. Perhaps the most significant new piece of information in this episode is the First Federation. This is the first mention of a Federation in Star Trek, and it's specifically called the First Federation. Perhaps this is the precursor of our Federation, although we never see any spaceships like the Fesarius again. While in reality this was probably introduced as a standalone episode idea and never followed up, it's an interesting concept. Regardless, we know the Federation must exist, the First Federation must exist based on information from future episodes, and this does not contradict anything in the older episodes to any great degree, so it's an interesting side point. Mudd's Woman is the 6th episode of Season 1. It was the 4th episode produced, its stardate is 1329.8, and its original air date was the 13th of October 1966. In this episode, the Enterprise is chasing a Class J cargo ship. This is of minimal historical significance, but is technically interesting. An image of what we think the ship looked like is in the top right corner. While lithium crystals were first mentioned in episode 3, where no man has gone before, it's a major plot point in this episode. The Enterprise uses between 4 and 6 lithium crystals, and they are essential to the ship's power system. When the lithium crystals fail, the ship has to run on battery power. This is the second time the Enterprise finds itself in this situation. I'm unsure why they do not have spares. Of course, at a later date, this changes to dilithium rather than the term lithium. We first hear Spock's race's name, which is stated as Vulcanian. The lack of emotion is also noted in this episode. This episode mentions lithium mining stations, which in this case is not automated and is manned by human miners. The girls are human and are searching for husbands, so the men on the mining stations must be human. The station must be an Earth mining planet as a result. It's interesting how Kirk does not have much authority over the miners, but this could be due to the urgency on Kirk's side, so he does not have the time to enforce his authority if he so desires, and thus has to rely on cooperation. The episode mentions another planet, in this case Opikudius 3. This is a planet which has settlers on it and is on the frontier, so is likely a colony planet. 3 more planets are mentioned in this episode, but not named. One is a Pelganic planet, which means it's mainly covered by water. Another has a helium experimental station on it, and the last is an automated farming planet. All worlds, or all would, have been Earth planets, or set up by Earth, as the 3 girls are all human. In this episode, Kirk offers to pay for the lithium crystals, which means the world of Star Trek uses currency, capitalism, and all that stuff. The use of lithium crystals to power the Enterprise is confirmed for a second time in this episode. We do learn there is something called auxiliary impulse engines, which could be small impulse engines used in an emergency. We finally learn the name of Spock's race, which in this case is Vulcanian. In the episode, a lot of planets are listed. Rigel 12 is a mining planet. Opikudius 3 is a frontier planet with settlers. Not named are the 3 girls, or the planets the 3 girls come from, which is a farming or research planet, which are inhabited by very few humans and are mainly automated. Finally, we learn the world of Star Trek uses some form of currency or payment. It may not be physical money, but a currency which can be used to buy lithium crystal does exist. While by the time of the next generation currency could be obsolete, it's unlikely, so that the next generation episodes which describe a federation with no currency is either correct or describes a completely different dimension or universe. The Enemy Within is the 5th episode of Season 1. It was the 5th episode produced, its stardate is 1672.1, and its original air date was the 6th of October 1966. In the episode, the crew are exploring planet Alpha 177. The planet appears uninhabited, and during the night the temperatures drop a lot, so no human life could possibly live on it. We finally get to see a hand phaser. The hand phasers can be set to stun or to kill. Spock uses the Vulcan neck pinch for the first time, although it has no name in this episode. We do discover in this episode that we do not have any shuttles, only the transporter. Another planet is disclosed, although it is uninhabitable and of no value for colonization, but perhaps useful for mining. The hand phaser is shown for the first time. Spock's neck pinch is also shown for the first time. The Man Trap is the second episode of Season 1. It was the sixth episode produced, its stardate is 1513.1, and its original air date was the 8th of September 1966. The exact term Vulcan rather than Vulcanian is used for the first time. We also know Vulcan does not have a moon. This episode mentions planet M113. This is uninhabited but once hosted a civilization which is long dead. It's assumed this civilization never achieved spaceflight, and it looks like it never reached a high level of technology. But this is all assumption, and the episode provides almost no information about the civilization. I think this is a real lost opportunity. The ruins look like they could be 5,000 years old, but this is again a wild guess based on the remastered version of the Star Trek episode. The episode also mentions another planet, which is called Wrigley's Pleasure Planet. As the creature adopts the form of one of the women from the planet, and the crewmen probably took advantage of the pleasures of the planet, we can safely assume it's inhabited by humans and is probably an Earth-controlled planet. It's obviously not a colony, but may be owned by a single individual or company. I wonder if the Wrigley's is linked to the chewing gum company. Also mentioned in Season 1, Episode 6, Mud's Woman, the Enterprise is called a starship for the second time in this episode. We learn in the episode that Spock's blood is different from that of humans, although we don't have any detail. The term Vulcan is used for the first time, which is the name of the planet that Spock came from. Vulcan does not have a moon, which means that the Star Trek reboot displays another error. There are ancient dead civilizations within the boundary of the territory controlled by Earth. We are also told of a pleasure planet, which is probably a human planet which specializes in, guess what, pleasure, possibly even privately owned. The term starship is used for a second time. We are uncertain if this describes all spacecraft or only large ones such as the Enterprise. Prior to this, the term Earthship was used most often. Spock's blood is different from human blood, which saves Spock's life in this particular episode. Another indication that he is alien. Many of the latter Star Trek movies and shows do not align with the original vision of the Star Trek series. This is common in real history, as later historians attempt to change the past in order to justify their beliefs in the present. As I personally enjoy the original vision of Star Trek, I would hope future material would come back to its original roots, but I doubt that will ever occur. And so this concludes episode 1 of my Star Trek, the original series episode breakdown video series. Alle guten Dingen, kommen zu einem Ende.